Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so happy that so many of you showed up for this eccentric and strange topic. You hear the more eccentric and strange lecturer. So I've got an hour. It sounds like a long time. It's not that long a time. The last time I came to Duquesne University, actually I've been here for 3 successive years over the last 5. And as I came over the bridge thing and went across the deal, I turned left and went to the School of Music, because that's what I was doing here. I had nothing to do with economics or politics. I was teaching a week-long class in Gregorian chant, which is a little bit strange, you know. There are people who know me only from this world of Gregorian chant, and they're astonished to find out that in another section of my life I was radical anarcho-capitalist, and I can't make any sense of that. And then in the world of economics, they're amazed to find out that I'm some sort of, crazed maiden for Gregorian chant, and I have like a third of the chants memorized, committed to memory. And actually, something that wasn't in my bio is I write a weekly column on Gregorian chant, too. I've been doing this for 6 years. I mean, how is that even possible, 6 years of a weekly column on Gregorian chant? But anyway. I don't know how these things come together, really. I only have to say that, when I think about the world of chant, most of it was written in the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries. This is a pre-literate culture where people were desperate to convey stories to each other in a time before the printing press and before even the internet, where you couldn't get stuff. Information was kind of, scarce. And it was very difficult to convey the stories that the Christians wanted to convey. And they had to find ways to do it in a compelling way. So Gregorian chant was sort of the PowerPoint presentations of the time. Finding musically evocative ways to tell beautiful stories from the past. And they made them up. And there was competition between the composers. And there was a management structure called the Church of Rome that was always leaning on these guys to hurry up and meet the deadlines, because there's no introit for it, the second Sunday after Pentecost or whatever. And the monks would compete to tell ever more brilliant stories, kind of a folk music. I mean, something that arose from the people to transmit a tradition and an idea in a strange and unstable world. And I'm so captivated by that. And the fact that they were able to come up with these melodies that really built, Western music as we know it. I mean, all the motifs you hear in pop music today, or at the symphony hall, or anywhere, have their foundation in this Gregorian chant. It's kind of like, the infrastructure of everything we know about art. So yeah, I got really interested and puzzled with it. And who preserved it? I mean, was it a government program? Was it like a bureaucracy for the preservation of Gregorian chant? No. It was preserved by human action, human memory, across countries and centuries, and comes down to us almost entirely intact, 1,400 years later. I mean, that's longer than any existing state has ever existed. It draws attention to the capacity of humanity to build beautiful things independent of their political organizations, just through human action and memory alone. That's an amazing thing. And I think that there's a certain analogy to capitalism here, and there's a certain analogy to the development of society itself. So that's my best attempt to make sense of these two parts of my life and how they work together. So this lecture that I've been asked to give has asked me to draw it even more precisely together two other aspects of my life, my love of economics and my love of the Catholic faith. So I'm sure to say things that you can't possibly agree with. In fact, I'm in a very difficult position if you were a tribunal. I'm sure that by the end of the evening you would certainly condemn me to hell for the things I'm going to say tonight. Because I love Catholic social teaching. I think it's important. I think it's made a very important contribution. And yet I'm deeply attached to the idea of capitalism, to free markets, and free peoples generally. And you would never know that it's possible to combine these two things through a quick internet search. If you look at Catholic social teaching, what you'll quickly find is that it's just a big, gigantic, mega-sized can of left liberal reflexes. I mean, that's the message you get, if you look it up. I was looking at some children's manual, on Catholic social teaching, where they teach kids how to live out Catholicism, in their lives. And like the very first thing it says is, consider turning your household toilet into a compost pile to save resources. What's that got to do with Catholic? But anyway, this is generally the ethos that's out there. I mean, people have this impression that Catholic social teaching is fulfilled by just a series of kind of fashionable, social policies, essentially, supporting the expansion of government in every conceivable way you can think about this. I've been writing on this topic for years, Catholic social teaching, and I was really glad to be asked to give this lecture because it gave me a chance to revisit the whole question of Catholic social teaching and try to draw attention to the big picture and understand, why it even exists in the first place. And I think this is the first question we need to deal with. And by the way, just to give you a slight look at what I'm going to cover, I'm going to first cover the background and meaning of Catholic social teaching. Then I'm going to attempt to recharacterize free markets in light of that, and then I'm going to end with a little discussion of why I think religious people are typically so confused about economics. So that's the agenda for tonight. And if you have a tape recorder, you're welcome to record it. I'll be really happy for this to be uploaded on the internet or whatever. I'm really a big advocate of the spreading of information in any way ever. I'm trying to record it myself, but we'll see if it works. In any case, so Catholic social teaching is said to begin with Rerum Novarum, which is a document that came out in 1891. And since that time, there's been about 16 other documents that are considered to be part of Catholic social teaching. So you've got a lot of reading on your hands to try to get through all this stuff. It's mixed, it's ebbed and flowed, it's gone this way and that over centuries, over the years. People are always jumping on various things that popes have said variously. I mean, most recently, for example, Pope Benedict was quoted by the press as saying, as condemning as immoral what he called unrestrained financial capitalism. And so, of course, I get this big flurry of notes from people, going, so what do you have to say to that, Mr. Catholic? Are you going to change your view or be excommunicated now? Or are you going to give up your faith and condemn this crazy man? Or, you're going to relent and finally admit that you're a heretic? I get this stuff all the time, And so I look up his speech, and actually what he said seems more or less reasonable, actually. Unrestrained financial capitalism is a very peculiar thing, made possible only by strange financial institutions that are alive today with unlimited power of governments to create unlimited amounts of fiat currency. Without any kind of competitive restriction that the market would otherwise provide. So, I mean, you can actually make sense of what he's saying. It actually makes sense in light, especially since the crisis of 2008. But this happens all the time. Anytime the Pope says anything about economics, the press jumps on it and says, look, the Pope's a socialist. This has been going on for decades, Then you actually look into it, and it turns out not to really be true. And by the way, if a pope is a socialist, let's say the Pope came out for socialism, how would that affect you as an individual Catholic? And I'm going to kind of get into this question of like, what are Catholics obligated to believe about what the Church teaches? Because it actually is a very important topic that ties very closely into Catholic social teaching generally. So let's just back up and put yourself in the 19th century when these documents first came out. Now, why Rerum Novarum is considered the first document of Catholic social teaching, I do not know. Because there were other documents that came out in the decades prior to this that spoke directly to the social question that are just as compelling and just as interesting. But for whatever reason, it's become a convention to call Rerum Novarum the first document of Catholic social teaching. There's no real basis for this. When the Pope put out this document, he didn't have some sort of consciousness that he was inaugurating a new era. In fact, the Catholic Church is a little funny. It hardly ever does anything really new, which is kind of cool. On the face of it, it's a little bit strange that 2,000 years would go by and there was no such thing as a teaching about social structures, and suddenly one pope pops up out of nowhere and says, oh, here's my new great infallible teaching, on how society should be set up. That's not really the way the Catholic Church works. Development is very slow, it takes a lot of centuries, a lot of time, there's a gigantic embedded tradition there, the teaching changes gradually, it develops. It's not like the Eastern Church where things were pretty much set by day one and they're changed again. In the Western Church, things do tend to change over time, but it's a gradual development. There's usually not something spectacularly new unless there's a really compelling reason for it. Well, in this period, there really was a very compelling reason for it. So, the 19th century was an amazing time in the history of humanity. It took all of, 500,000 years or something for the first 1 billion people to come to live simultaneously on this planet. And in the course of the 19th century, that 1 billion was transformed to 2 billion. And half that growth occurred in that 1 century. I mean, just a spectacular change. This is like nothing ever before seen in the history of humanity. It's the same thing with lifespans. Suddenly, people began to live longer than, on average, 32, 36 years old. By the end of the 19th century, people were living to the age of 50, which is an amazing transformation. It was for the first time in world history the creation of a robust and serious and politically substantial and significant thing that we call middle class. It hadn't really existed up until the time. I mean, from the beginning of recorded time up until the time of the Renaissance, there was essentially no progress at all. And then there's a little bit of progress, and suddenly in the 19th century, everything transformed itself. And if you can look at the charts, and it's actually mind-blowing to see population figures, whatever wealth creation, anything you want to look at is just like flat from the beginning of time, and then suddenly the 19th century, everything takes off. This was the age of what was then known as liberalism, which is a little bit kind of different liberalism from what people talk about now. Liberalism meant freedom, it meant ownership. As part of that, there was capital accumulation and the development of the enterprising economy with long route production methods and the accumulation of capital and the spreading of wealth and riches. This was a transformative time in the history of the world. And you know what? It turns out the Catholic Church was really excited about this, as was everyone. Life was undergoing gigantic upheavals. It seemed like there was nothing but a future of peace and prosperity. The wars of the old world seemed to be kind of ever more condemned and looked down upon by the humanitarians of the world. There was progress in science and in every area of life, and health. And the church was really on board with this in many ways. But in the late 19th century, some things began to change a little bit that seriously alarmed, in particular, the church in Rome. And that was three simultaneous things. The rise of socialist doctrine and the teachings of Karl Marx, highly significant. The rise of nationalism as a force that was essentially anti-Catholic and anti-faith, and pro-secular, and pro-state, really. Nationalism in Europe is very difficult for Americans to understand any of this stuff because we're talking about a different place at a different time. And thirdly, and this is hugely significant for the Catholic Church, the loss of the papal states in Italy. This was gigantic. It was so serious, the rise of nationalism and the loss of the papal states, that Pius IX, who's the predecessor Pope to Leo XIII, who issued Rerum Novarum, he had started his papacy out as like a liberal, like in the old-fashioned sense, like believing in progress, hating old world statism, wanting to free the prisoners, permitting massive amounts of liberty. That's the way he started his papacy. I like this guy. He was a really cool guy when he started his papacy. And then something very strange began to happen in the course of his papacy. He had let out of prison many of the political prisoners in the papal states. And because he was a believer in humanitarianism, really. And in 1848, two big events happened. One was the coming out of the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. And the other was that one of these guys he let out of jail shot his Secretary of the Interior dead. Actually, he wasn't shot. He was stabbed while strolling, in one of those Piazza della whatevers in Rome. Knife through the throat, and the nationalists began to take over Rome, and the Pope and his entire entourage had to leave to preserve their safety. Okay, he feels like a jerk. Like, okay, well, I guess I was an idiot. This whole liberalism thing, it might be good for humanity, but it's not so hot for the Catholic Church. All right? I'm being, punished for my old attitudes. Surrounded by advisors that said, look, it's time for a crackdown. We are losing the papal states one by one by one. Your temporal power in this world is vanishing. We are looking at a world, this is your future, in which the Catholic Church has no authority politically whatsoever. What do you think about that world? This is a world of nationalism, of violence, where people where high church officials are murdered, where you can't even be safe in your own headquarters, where you can't rule. This is a world without the rule of the Catholic Church, and where socialists and secularists and powerful government leaders are going to crush human rights at every turn. What are we going to do about this? So Pius IX had the idea that he would call a church council, and that church council was called Vatican I. This was 1868. This is the most substantial thing that happened in the Catholic Church in the 19th century. And hardly anybody talks about it now because it's not really relevant to Americans. But to Europeans, it was a gigantic thing. This was the Catholic Church trying to deal with a world where it had no power. It had no rights to pick up the sword and no rights to rule anyone or anything. It was looking at a world of democracy and a world in which the sole influence of the Catholic Church was going to be culturally based and socially based and nothing else. And that was terrifying to a whole generation. So Pius IX called Vatican I. And why did he call this council? Well, he didn't tell anybody why he was calling the council. And it was a big pain in the neck in those days to attend the church council, I can tell you. Especially for the Americans, right? I mean, you can imagine what was going on in 1868, right? We got, civil wars, winding down or whatever. Everything's a disaster. There's murderous, bloodshed all over the place and upheaval. And, so not such a great, rich country by comparison to today. Anyway, and so all the bishops of the United States were being called overseas. Oh, wait, this is not such a great idea. I mean, all their dioceses are falling apart. Everything's a calamity. And they get called off to a crazy church council. They have no idea why. You're stuck in Rome for years with terrible weather, living in stupid little apartments and having to slog to work every day, going to to hear long lectures, in echoey chambers, unmiked in Latin, a language they didn't even understand. So they're pretty annoyed by this whole church council, you can imagine. So anyway, so why had Pius IX called the thing? Well, he didn't reveal it to anybody until quite late in the day. But the whole deal that animated him was this question of the infallibility of the Pope himself, and its limits and its reach. Everybody more or less agreed that the Pope had a lot of authority over doctrine and faith, like doctrine and faith and morals, what people should do, and what we believe about transubstantiation or the Virgin Mary or whatever. But Pius IX was you understand this guy is now no longer a old-fashioned liberal. He wants to have his power shored up. What he was asking the bishops to do was grant him and all popes in the past and in the future infallibility over politics. Very interesting. That's what he wanted. He wanted the bishops of the world to grant him and certify the rights of the Church of Rome to pick up that sword and wield it in the event of an emergency. If it had to rule, the temporal power, the sword, political infallibility is what he demanded. And that's why they were gathered. And he didn't reveal it until years after these people had been hanging out at this place. Well, it was stopped. It was stopped by a combination of the intellectual activities of a certain Lord Acton, who was a very interesting guy, and also a certain great intellectual in England by the name of John Henry Newman, later to be John Henry Cardinal Newman. They were both believers in a new idea for the Catholic Church called religious liberty. It was a radical notion. We won't rule, we won't be the government, we won't pick kings and queens, we won't attend their coronations, we won't ourselves have even an army at all, except maybe just some really cool looking guys in nice outfits with swords to defend the Pope himself, but other than that, we won't have an army. And we're just going to exercise religious, just cultural influence and social influence. Well, Pius IX was defeated at Vatican I. Everybody says Vatican I shored up the infallibility of the Pope. Well, it didn't, actually. It rejected the political infallibility of the Pope. That's the most significant thing to come out of the First Vatican Council. Not the infallibility of the Pope, but the rejection of the infallibility of the Pope over the area in which Pius IX absolutely wanted. So there was a compromised position, we'll grant you infallibility over faith and morals, but politics, you, Holy Father, are finished. That was the upshot of that council. It was devastating and amazing. It was a new, and sure enough, all the papal states were lost, gone forever. The Vatican was seriously under attack and under fire. Pius IX dies. Leo XIII comes along. And Leo XIII, his successor, is a completely different sort of figure. He wanted to recapture that original liberal outlook of Pius IX and fight back against nationalism and socialism using what he believes is that most powerful weapon, pastoral teaching and words. Just moral influence. The same thing that the Catholic Church uses today. He was the first one to really do this, to really issue pastoral letters. And he issued in his papacy more pastoral letters than had been, binding documents, really, from the Pope that had been issued in the previous 500. And the first one was on society, and the second one was on socialism itself. So he was burned with a passion. He's not going to pick up the sword, but he is going to have something to say about this calamity that at the time was haunting Europe, the rise of socialist teaching. If you read the Communist Manifesto, it's the most bizarre document you'll ever read. I mean, you can't even believe that anybody was convinced by this nonsense, right? I mean, it basically calls for the elimination of civil society as we know it. Private property, the family, everything. Everything's gone. All because some insane guy, claims it should be. And it was, the Pope clearly saw that if we implement the system, we were going to get a dictatorship, and human rights were going to be finished. So his very first document that he came out with, again, people say it's gone, Vatican I over, no more temporal power. They still haven't reconciled themselves to the idea of religious liberty. He comes out with a document called Quod Apostolici Muneris, and it was a document on socialism. And he called socialism a deadly plague that is creeping into the very fibers of human society and leaving it on the verge of destruction. Very strong language. Socialists are bound together by their closest ties and a wicked confederacy. And they no longer seek the shelter of secret meetings, but openly and boldly marching forth in the light of day. They strive to bring to a head what they have long been planning: the overthrow of all civil society whatsoever. And he clarified the idea of equality. He said, look, what is equality? Equality of men consists in this: that all, having inherited the same nature, are called to the same most high dignity of the sons of God. And that, as one and the same end is set before all, that each one of us will be judged by the same law, and each will receive the same punishment or reward according to his deserts. That's what equality is. Equality isn't equality of possession. It's not using the state to smash the rich and loot everybody. And this was particularly upsetting to the Pope, the idea that the institution of theft itself was embedded in the socialist doctrine. And he said, look, stealing and robbery are forbidden in a special manner by God, the author and defender of right, that he would not allow man even to desire what belongs to another, much less to steal it. And that the thieves and the spoilers, no less than adulterers and idolaters, are shut out from the kingdom of heaven. This is what the Pope is saying in his first great document, 1878, Quod Apostolici Muneris. And I like to think of this as being the first great social teaching, not Rerum Novarum. I mean, if you don't understand this document, you will never understand Rerum Novarum. It's a brilliant, brilliant document. 1878, available now online, right? We went through a long time, nobody ever heard about it. Now it's one quick way, you can see this stuff. The advocates of today's Catholic social teaching never want to talk about this thing, but it is a burning and passionate attack on the whole idea of socialism. Well, why does this matter? I mean, I'm telling you, it seems to me that what the Pope saw in this document is highly significant. He saw what a gigantic threat socialist idea was. And was he right? Well, look forward. Look what happened in the 20th century. We first had the Mexican Revolution, which slaughtered untold numbers of people and abolished the Catholic Church and violated human rights. And then we had the Bolshevik Revolution, which eventually over the course of 70 years led to uncountable tens of millions of deaths and vast human suffering. I mean, socialism was the great menace of the 20th century. Unfortunately, mostly gone in the world today. The Pope saw something very important, and that's essentially what gave birth to Catholic social teaching. Catholic social teaching, the upshot of it, and the reason it existed at all, was to attack the idea of an overwhelmingly huge nation state, and in particular a socialist state that would violate human rights and attack human freedom, attack religious liberty, and establish tyranny and despotism the world over. And that is the purpose of Catholic social teaching. That's the reason it existed in the first place. And that's why it came out. Because in a time when the Catholic Church could no longer lift the sword, when it could no longer exercise the temporal power, the Church believed that it needed to have some kind of moral structure, some sort of bounds, some kind of rules and ideas that would restrain the state and would restrain nationalism, restrain the crazy socialist fanatics of our time, and remind people of the application of moral principles. Even in a world where the Catholic Church could not rule, maybe directly, at least it could set up some kind of guidelines and principles by which society could manage to preserve its freedom. And if you don't understand that aspect of Catholic social teaching, nothing else makes sense to you. Then Rerum Novarum comes out. This is the second great document, usually considered to be the first. And in many ways it represented the liberalism most embodied by his predecessor, Pius X. He was a liberal in the old sense. He established the Vatican Conservatory because of his love of science. He was the first pope to be recorded with sound. He loved technology. This guy was a great guy, Leo XIII. He was also the first pope to ever be filmed. He was all digging on whatever the cool new gadgets were. He wanted the church to come to terms with the reality of liberalism, and he wanted to separate the good liberalism from what he considered to be the bad liberalism. So what are the highlights of Rerum Novarum? It's a brilliant document in many ways. In the first place, it rejects the conflict-based analytics of the social order that you find in the world of, in the mind of Karl Marx and all the socialists, and that still exists today. The idea of this conflict-based idea is that, essentially is this. Human beings, we can't get along. We just can't get along. You think you're getting along with people, you're not. Really, not really. If you're a laborer and you like your boss, you're wrong to like your boss because he's actually doing it. He's taking all your value. And look, he's living high and high, and you are suffering as a result. There's all kinds of conflicts, and we're surrounded by them everywhere. You think you love your wife, and your wife loves you? No. This is truly exploitation. I mean, it's a form of slavery, really, And it's the same thing with races. I mean, it's not possible for the races to get along. There's this weird kind of, dynamic that's, there's this deeply embedded conflict there that, it seems like people are being nice to each other. Actually, in their hearts, they're seething with resentment, and they're right to, Society is impossible in the Marxian worldview because of these conflicts. And the only way to rectify them is just to expropriate the expropriators in whatever form they appear. Oh, another great thing is that, nowadays, today's Marxists, have this conflict-based view on nature. Like if you, dig in the ground, and like plant something, then that, I don't know, that's like, cutting a scar in Mother Earth or whatever, so, and so on. So everything is a conflict, to these people. So Rerum Novarum directly attacked this conflict-based view of the social order. Secondly, it embraces a very hardcore embrace of private property as the great bringer of social peace. Private property, and he even says, that's Aristotle, is the thing that makes charity possible. If you don't own things, it's not possible for you to give things. It's not possible for you to trade things. And trade is the basis of human association. Thirdly, it embraces free association of all human beings. It says that anybody has the right to associate with anybody under any conditions. Whatever, you can be a Catholic, you can be a Muslim, it doesn't matter. You can establish every kind of associations, whether it be business or civic or otherwise. And then finally, the fourth highlight of Rerum Novarum is that it absolutely backs the freedom of all people to worship. So you cannot, as a Catholic, for example, be denied the right to worship in a manner of your choosing. That's the essence of Rerum Novarum. And that's the big message of the document that's considered to be Catholic social teaching. Now, to me, you look at that lineup of stuff, that's all 100% in defense of human liberty. That's all the stuff I believe in, as a radical advocate of, classical liberalism myself. This document speaks to me very brilliantly, very wonderfully. Now, he also speaks to the rights of workers. And it's this aspect of things that has been sort of taken out of Catholic teaching and held up to everybody as, the key message of Rerum Novarum. Now, there's nothing wrong with everything he says about the rights of workers to be paid a just wage, a right to be sustained, in their livelihoods. One of the things that people forget about the 19th century, I mentioned earlier that it was a time of exploding populations. When people also talk about the 9th century as a time where there was more poverty, sickness, and disease, orphans, and human suffering than ever before. And I'm willing to grant that. It's really true. There was a time, there was more disease alive on this planet in the 19th century than any other time in history. There were more orphans than ever before in the streets of the cities of Europe. There were more suffering old people than there's ever been. But the reason for that is because there were simply more people than there had ever been before on the planet. And these people that you're seeing suffering in previous ages and times would have just quite simply been dead. That's the difference. That's what gave rise to the socialist theory. They saw massive spreading of poverty. Well, yeah, there were more people, poor people than ever before, because all those people wouldn't have existed in the past. They would have just kicked the bucket long ago. I mean, that's the difference. So it takes a certain insight to understand this. But the Pope was trying to offer an alternative way of coming to terms with the rights of the poor and the suffering, the aged and the orphans, and the workers of the world that didn't involve violating their rights and the rights of property. That's the essence of Rerum Novarum. My favorite passage from this Rerum Novarum, speaking as an anarchist myself, it goes like this. There is no need to bring in the state. Man precedes the state and possesses, prior to the formation of any state, the right of providing for the substance of his body. Very nice. This is Rerum Novarum, not a passage you hear quoted very often. And the document further discusses the rights and duties of all people to have to each other, and the ends that are, and it ends with a wonderful tribute to human charity, which he calls the mistress and queen of all virtues, the fulfilling of the whole gospel law, and man's surest antidote against worldly pride and immoderate love of self. Well, that was the first, and there were many others to go. There are 16 documents, the themes ebb and flow throughout the course of the century. Various applications, various implications. I think some mistakes have been made in the course of some of these documents. They haven't all been 100% fantastic. But look, we discussed earlier a little bit about Vatican I. Vatican I said that the Pope has no political infallibility. He is not everything the Pope does and says with regard to politics is protected from error. That was the upshot of Vatican I. Why would it be the case that somehow, in light of that very strong declaration from a church council, that the Pope is only infallible when he's speaking on matters of morals and doctrine and nothing else? Why would he then begin to somehow mysteriously and magically exercise some sort of infallible power in speaking on matters of economics? It's ridiculous. I mean, he has the right to speak like anybody else. But according to the church herself, he cannot bind anyone's conscience according to this. So yes, there have been, I think, some regrettable statements along the way. But in no way do those bind us. The purpose of Catholic social teaching is to take fundamental moral principles and apply them to social relations in ways that the church considers to be the most wise thing possible. It's not infallibility, there's no protection there, but they're worth looking at. And I would say, I actually kind of listed what I consider to be the three main themes of Catholic social teaching over the course of the century. The primary purpose of this body of work is to restrain the push towards the Leviathan state. Right? And this is especially true in the area of religious liberty. Now, it took a full century until the Second Vatican Council for the Church to finally embrace religious freedom as a positive idea. It took a long time for the Church to come around to this. I mean, the loss of the papal states was devastating. The loss of failure of Pius X to get his political infallibility granted to him. But it still took another century for the Church to finally come out with a teaching, a church document that said every human right has a right to religious liberty. But that is at the core of Catholic social teaching, that idea. And a related purpose is to affirm the inviolability of the rights of the human person. And further, that the purpose is not to present a detailed blueprint for economic systems, but to carefully find applications of fundamental moral truths. And one of my favorite documents, and I would say this as a big advocate of free markets, is Pope John Paul II's great document called Centesimus Annus, which came out after the collapse of socialism. It's a very mixed. It was issued on the 100th anniversary of Rerum Novarum. Rerum Novarum, warning about socialism. Centesimus Annus, what do we learn from this idiotic experience of socialism? Okay, it was a grueling, horrible thing. What can it teach us? Centesimus Annus is very interesting. It has lots of, in some ways, it's almost like a tutorial on economics. It explains how the price system works, the merit and wonders of profits, the merit of the business economy, that it's always serving humanity. It's a really great document, and very much influenced by some Austrians, actually, Austrian school economists who were hanging around at the time and had a lot of influence on the Pope. And it's brilliant stuff. But in the course of this thing, he says right at the very beginning, the church has no models to present. Models that are real and truly effective can only arise within the framework of different historical situations through the efforts of all those who responsibly confront concrete problems in all their social, economic, political, and cultural aspects as these interact one with each other. For such a task, the church offers her teaching as an indispensable and ideal orientation. That's it. A teaching which, as I already mentioned, recognizes the positive value of the market and of enterprise. That's it. So it provides an ideal orientation, not a model, not a precise blueprint for how to manage the state, in other words. So if you understand those things, you understand now more than like 99% of humanity about Catholic social teaching. I'm looking at the clock and seeing that I have only 10 minutes left. 15, okay. That's only the first part of my talk. I think, oh my God, there's 2 more parts to go. Okay, but maybe they won't be as long. Just briefly, I want to recharacterize what I consider to be the free market for you, because I think it's important if we're going to discuss, are you for or against free markets, that we understand what we're talking about. It's very difficult these days. Just look what the Pope said. He just tossed off a remark the other day. He said, look, there's something really wrong with this unrestrained financial capitalism. Well, no kidding, all right? Everybody goes, look, he's against the free market. He's for socialism. Right? This is just a failure to understand terminology. So if I'm going to say I'm for free markets, I feel like I need to map out for you what my own conception of what this really consists of, what it is, and maybe just a couple of seconds of what it is not. So I just have 5 quick principles on this. The first one, a foundation of the free market, is human volition. That just means the freedom to choose. For you to exercise your right to make choices. That is the foundation of the free market. And without that, nothing else exists. That's a core principle. The second one is ownership, by which I mean private property ownership. Private property in one's body is kind of integral to the whole of human experience. Private property over land and animals and things like this came about in the course of history at a distinct period, probably some 500 million years ago, because people ran out of stuff to eat, and they had to figure out ways to raise their own food. And it turns out the best way to do that is to take possession of animals, breed them, domesticate them, and turn them into food, and learn how to farm, come to master farm. All these things involve property ownership. And within that context, you can see that part of owning and choosing means, of course, trading, which gets us to our third principle, which is cooperation. People coming together to, instead of kicking each other and hitting each other with sticks and beating each other up and fighting over scarce resources, instead they learn to trade with each other, both to their mutual advantage. And this is a great and brilliant institution because it means value creation. When I give up something that I possess in exchange for something that somebody else possesses, we both win. We both gain something of value. An amazing insight, an astonishing institution, something that is the foundation of building of wealth in all times and all places, and yet which is rarely understood. And actually, speaking of Benedict himself, you know that he makes a little bit of a mistake in his last social encyclical called Caritates in Veritate, I think, something like that. And it's a very interesting one for any Aristotelians in the audience because, you know, he's very well classically trained. And he makes this mistake that all trading has to, people should trade except only things of equal value. That's the measure of justice in trade, is when you trade things of equal value. Well, this is what Aristotle said, and you know, Benedict is like this brilliant German theologian who's read all the ancient gods, whatever. He's probably read everything up to about 1550 that existed, and then he probably like stopped or something. I don't know what happened, because he missed the whole innovation that economic science came up with, so they discovered that it wasn't, that trade doesn't happen because of the equality of exchange. It happens, or equality of value, it happens because of inequality of value. I value something more than you value it, you value my thing more than I value it, and therefore the trade takes place, right? This is, I wouldn't call the error elementary. It's kind of a brilliant mistake he made, really, in the sense that it illustrates his sheer erudition, right? But he just didn't get around to reading what the economists had to say. Economics is very late in developing in human history, economic theory. Very late. I mean, earlier than like Darwinian evolution, but, you know, I mean, it took like 1,500 years, you know, after the birth of Christ for anybody to come up with coherent economic teachings, except for, of course, the parables, which, by the way, somebody ought to give a lecture on that. The parables have great economics in them, but actual economic theory itself is very late in developing, and Benedict was with it. A fourth pillar of the free market, as far as I'm concerned, is learning. It's the amazing capacity that Marxists have for dispensing information and giving us the benefit of the experience and the ideas of others. Without this, we would all be lost. Every generation would start new. Every lifetime would just be groping in the dark. But with the advantage of the ability to learn from the experiences of others, to learn about the technologies that others have used, from seeing and observing and the trial and error that others have engaged in, we ourselves acquire all this constant new information. This is the institution of learning, which is so much a part of the market economy, without which it can never get off the ground and never create society that it has. And the final one is this institution of competition. You think that, most people when they think about the free market, they think, oh, you mean like competition. Well, it turns out competition is actually quite controversial. Capitalists themselves, they hate it. Why is that? Competition, I think of competition in two ways. On one hand, it's the relentless striving for excellence in the service of others. On the other hand, it's a vast conspiracy to reduce all profits to zero. That's what competition really is. All right? Competition is the power to reduce the powerful to nothing in an instant. It's what restrains institutions, any institutions, from being despotic, especially business institutions. The threat of competition is the biggest pain in the neck to the capitalist class of any other, and that's why they've always hated it, and it's been such a struggle and a trial to get it in the first place. The whole notion of competition didn't even come along until rather late. After feudalism, there was a whole period of European history which we call mercantilism, where every capitalist producer got special privileges. You know, you're going to bring silk to my kingdom. That's great. I'll give you the exclusive right to do so. That way, I know that you'll get it here, and my people will be happy. And then, in exchange for that, I will stop anybody else from doing the same. That seems like a good deal. Government working with business to serve people yourself. Well, you know, it's not such a good idea because it means essentially exploitation. Exploitation of possible competitors and of consumers who are invariably overcharged in this context. So it took centuries for competition, the idea of competition, especially free trade, you know, which is just one aspect of competition, to finally embed itself into the idea of markets. And even now, we're engaged in this huge struggle these days over patents and copyrights, which are essentially nothing other than the persistence of a mercantilist attitude, anti-competitive, setting up government monopolies with government legislation to privilege certain producers at the expense of everybody else. That's what intellectual property legislation truly is. It's anti-competitive. So those are my 5 institutions of the free market. I would say further that these institutions conform to the definition of charity that St. Paul himself laid out in Holy Scripture, and which was quoted by Leo XIII. Free markets tend to be very patient. They're always thinking about the long term and focused on the long run. They're kind. They never ask anybody to do anything that would violate the human conscience, always based on volition. It seeks not her own business enterprises, always about the other. If you ever know any successful business person, entrepreneur, they're obsessively concerned about what everybody else wants. That's the maniacal concern of every entrepreneur. Just absolute social consciousness like nobody else. Free enterprise suffers all things. Lord knows we know that. It endures all things. I cannot believe just how robust markets are in light of the relentless attempt to constantly crush them. Our partner and I were having a good time coming over here. We were talking about all the various ways in which the market somehow manages to survive. I mean, the most amazing example we experienced today was the airline industry. I mean, this industry has been pummeled and regulated and kicked and taxed and just bludgeoned to death, over the last 10 years, and somehow they, put a smile on their face and they improved the system. They developed new apps and new techniques for moving consumers around and filling up planes and somehow managing to make a profit. It's absolutely unbelievable. So it endures all things. And to me, the state is the perfect foil to the idea of human charity. It demands all things now. It's cruel. It only serves itself. It resists and it fights all its own suffering. And Lord knows if you're going to make the state suffer, they will make you pay the price. And it endures no disobedience or defiance. So to me, the market and the state represent the perfect polar opposites. Okay, I have just now a few minutes to kind of do the culminating thing here, to explain to you why I think religious people have such a difficult time with economics, and why I think we should be sympathetic with all those people who, in the realm of religion, don't really get economics and are not very interested in reading about it. They quite often think it's just a big hoax. It's like, I'm not really interested in economics. I don't really need to know that stuff. And I think this is the reason. And it's for the same reason lots of intellectuals themselves don't get economics. Religious people dwell in a world where there is no scarcity. And that world is the world of the mind and the heart and salvation. And let me give you an example. What if somebody came up to me and said, I'm very intrigued that you're a Catholic. I'm thinking about becoming a Catholic myself. And I said, listen, can we talk about this? Because, if you become a Catholic, that's a threat to me. You might take mine away. Well, why would I do that? Well, there's a limited amount of Catholicism to go around. You become a Catholic, maybe you can take that other guy's Catholicism, but I kind of want to keep mine. He would just think I was crazy. Right? Well, that's insane. Well, why is that crazy? It's because Catholicism is a non-scarce good. It can be multiplied infinitely. Just like salvation itself. Just like God's grace. There's an infinite amount. It's super abundant. Religious people are very concerned about this. This is the main issue they think about. Spreading the gospel. What if, for example, Christ came and his last words were, go teach all nations. But Just one quick point. There are only 1,000 units of salvation, really, that are allocated. So I'm going to kind of put you in charge of dispensing them. So just figure out how you're going to do that, right? And then got assumed up into heaven. This would have sent the apostles into a panic, right? Oh, only 1,000 units of salvation? I mean, like for all time? Or is it like when a person dies, we get one back? It would cause a lot of problems, right? Because there would be a competition over the use of this resource. It was a scarce good. I mean, when one person has it, somebody else can't have it. That would totally transform the Christian mission itself. But that's not what happened. Jesus made salvation an infinite good, infinitely multipliable. And that made all the difference. It's what created the evangelistic mission. It's an amazing thing. Salvation is for all. And one person's salvation doesn't come at the expense of anyone else. And what this draws attention to is that there's this realm out there called non-scarce goods. And how many things can we put into this context? How many things are part of this infinite bounty? As a Catholic, we have saints that kind of listen to our prayers. And as a musician, our helper is Saint Cecilia. A very interesting case, because nobody really knows why she's a patron saint of music. But she is. And music in Catholic churches, I don't know if you've been to a Catholic church recently, but there are issues, What should I say? So Saint Cecilia is rather busy. But apparently she has like an infinite amount of, like every time you go to Saint Cecilia, could you, just like, if you have a second, go and prevail upon God to like intervene in my parish, to stop this crazy guitar group from playing, and she listens to it, and she has the time, So she has this like infinite amount of time, I don't know how this is possible, but it just is. We live and think in this world of non-scarce goods. That's where religious people live and breathe. This is the reality we love, and this is the most important thing to us. Other things live in this world too. Music. Oh, music. It's infinite. It's infinitely reproducible. It's immortal. Some monk in the 8th century sang a song, and it can spread all throughout Europe, and everybody who sang that song can die, and right before they die, sing it to somebody else. You can pass it on to somebody else, and they pass it on to somebody else. And 1,300 years later, the same one song has become spread all over the world. That's the same song that some guy sang 1,300 years ago. Unbelievable. And I can stand before you right now and sing it. And you can take that song with you out the store and sing it at home tonight. And I won't find myself unable to sing it. I will prove it. Oh, somebody must be singing that song somewhere. No, it's reproducible. It's infinite. There's no conflict. You know what it is? It's communism. It's beautiful. It's socialism. Infinite abundance for all. In music, in salvation, in God's grace, in Saint Cecilia's time. And ideas. And every word I say to you tonight, you can take it with you. You don't have to beat me up and steal it from me if you like something I say. You don't have to, meet me in a dark alley and kick me until I cough up the words and relinquish them for you. No, you can take them with you and spread them to your children and to your friends unto infinity. This is the beautiful communism of the world of ideas. Superabundance. No conflicts, no violence, just reproducibility unto infinity. And so is with music, with art, with ideas, with charity, with your example. You're charitable to somebody's inspired by you, they can become charitable themselves. That doesn't turn you somehow into a greedy monster because you've stolen their charity from them. No, charity can be spread among all of humanity. This is a beautiful world of superabundance. And this is the world where religious people live and exist. And it's no wonder that they want this model to be pervasive all over the world and apply to all things and everything else too. Sadly for us, that is not the case. Because in the physical world, we struggle, and we will struggle into the end of time with this terrible thing called scarcity. If you have something, I can't have it unless I figure out some way to get it from you. There is a conflict over resources. If you like my scarf, you can pay me for it, or you can beat me up and take it. Or you can start your own business. But there's no way you can reproduce my scarf as if by magic. This is a shocking thing to realize. I went, you know this day called Black Friday? You know that occurs like somehow like the day after Thanksgiving, right? Where there's these massive struggles. So I went out for the first time ever on Black Friday this year. It was really fun. And yeah, because it was like one of the hoi polloi, you know. I haven't just remembered the buzz, showing up here, getting my cool things. So yeah, there was a little bit. People were kind of polite about it. It's a market setting, but there was a conflict. So this truly happened. So I'm in this place called Big Lots, and they had good place, and they had a notebook computer. They were advertising a notebook computer, you know, using an Android operating system for like $60. I thought, I gotta get it. So I gotta get it. Drove there at 4 a.m., you know, sat in the parking lot, and everybody else is there. And we're all kind of looking at each other. You know, like, what are you? Do you want that notebook? Because I'm like here, and that notebook's mine. And they're staring at me. For like 2 hours. And we're trying to carry on a conversation outside of the oh, yeah, where do you live over there? Oh, yeah, where I live over yeah. Oh, that's great, yeah. But, you know, we're trying to be nice to people, but what we really want to know is, are you here for the notebook computer? That's the thing. So the door opens up, we all rush in. Yeah, and we're trying to still, again, be polite. We want to kill each other, but we don't. And sure enough, they had, like, 5. And so, you know, we were kind of nonchalant about it. Say, you got that Android thing, you know, oh sure, you know, I gave you holding on to it for dear life, you know. And sure enough, I was the 5th one in line, I got one. You know, but the person behind me, the 6th person, was pretty annoyed. I mean, really annoyed. It was a very interesting thing to experience because you really do find yourself, you know, living in this world like, oh, this is what scarcity amounts to, you know. If you get it, I don't get it. That's a problem. Humanity has to figure out ways to solve this problem. And I would submit to you that the best way that anybody's ever come up with is this thing we call capitalism. It's the thing we call the market economy. Let everybody have their stuff, let everybody associate with each other and find other people that they can trade with to acquire resources, make contracts. Right? Let's don't kill each other. Let's not beat each other up. Let's not have violence. Let's have peace. Let's try peace. Peace through trade. That's the best way to deal with this world. There's a prayer in the Catholic Church. It's a prayer of Saint Michael. No, it's a prayer of Salve Regina. And there's a line. This valley of tears. Lacrimarum vale. What does it mean? It means that this will always, in some way, the physical world where we live will always be a place of suffering because there will never be enough. And we have to suffer. That's why we have to work. That's why we're always kind of struggling to overcome scarcity. It's relentless. It'll never end. And you know what? We'll never be happy. I mean, this little machine here, this iPhone 5, this is a miracle. It's not really making anybody really. I mean, you're happy for like 15 minutes when you get, well, that's pretty cool. Now I can access all the world's information, talk to anybody through video phone in 2 seconds, and, you know, test my blood pressure and check the temperature outside and, play an ocarina, this is all great, but, what's next? What's next for me, This is the way we've done things. This is why this is a valley of tears. We'll never be quite satisfied, no matter how much we get, because this will always be a world of scarcity. And this contrasts with the beautiful world that every person of faith dreams about, which is this world of superabundance, infinite reproducibility of salvation, infinite ability to access the grace of God, and live unto eternity with Him. We won't get there until we expire from this life. And as long as we live in this life, we need to find ways to get along. The market economy is precisely that. Let me just finish here with one quick observation, which was made by Cardinal Ratzinger actually before he became a pope. And I think it's just so profound. And I'm just going to read it to you because it explains something very important to me. You have to understand something about that. This guy came of age as an intellectual at a time when the big debate was over religious liberty. Shoot, this is a point for him, non-negotiable. It's kind of crazy. I mean, we've got a pope who believes that faith is so powerful, so compelling, so important, that it doesn't need the sword to enforce it. He came to terms with this reality in his own mind. He was a critical player at Vatican II. He said, you know what? The Catholic Church doesn't need the state. All we need is to be left alone. And through prayer, the power of witness, the power of the gospel, through faith in our Lord, we will change this world. That's Benedict's core conviction. And not every Catholic believes this. There are groups out there that are still upset about the Declaration of Liberty, religious liberty of Vatican II. There's a group called the St. Pius X Society. They will never be reconciled until they embrace religious liberty. And he will not reconcile them until they do. This is the core principle for him. So this is a man who understands faith. The Catholic Church has come around to religious liberty completely and fully, in the same way that I believe in the future they will completely come around to the idea of economic liberty. But it takes time. But he said, this is what he wrote when he was writing. He was explaining this very important passage where Roman soldiers were trying to trick Jesus. They gave him a coin, they said, does this belong to it? And he said, well, bring to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but to God what belongs to God. And we read this and we're really riveted by this thing. We don't always understand what it means, but for him it was everything. For Ratzinger, he says, you must take a clear look at the relationship of the church to the political sphere. For this, Christ's words remain fundamental. Render, therefore, to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. This saying opened up a new section in the history of the relationship between politics and religion. Until then, the general rule was that the politics itself was the sacral, it was the sacred, it was the holy thing. Admittedly, later ancient world knew free groups, but they learned the mystery of the cults, whose attraction depended on the decline of state religion. But tolerance with regard to them rested on the presupposition that the state was recognized as the bearer of supreme holiness, and safeguard the ethical binding force of its laws, and with its human guarantee of cohesion of these laws, and then the state itself appearing as the expression of the sacred, divine, and not purely human will, because they are divine and must be continued unquestionably and unconditionally to bind men and women. That's what the state was until that moment. That was the division of history in Benedict's mind. That's what blew apart the structure of society when Christ said, the state is not God. What belongs to God is different from what belongs to Caesar. that blew apart the whole structure of the ancient world and inaugurated for him a new era of human liberty that separates the human conscience from politics. The separation must always be there. That's why I believe so strongly in the market economy. Fundamentally, because the state is not God. That, more than anything else, is my core reason. Well, it's taken way longer than I should have, but thank you so much. And we can take some questions now.
Yeah.
Okay.
20 minutes to take questions.
20 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll start here. Go ahead.
You mentioned that Vatican I
Yeah.
stated that the Pope does not have infallibility when it comes to economics.
Right.
Was there any document or statements, or can you get into any more detail on that?
Is anybody else curious about this whole Vatican I story? I mean, it's probably the first time we've ever heard anything about this. And I don't know, like, people don't read about this history at all. But you have to read deep in the history, because if you read the documents of Vatican I, what they basically say is that the Pope is infallible on doctrine morals, and that's what they leave it. But so you have to actually read in the history to discover what the Pope was actually looking for. And he delayed it a very long time. He had these people hanging around talking about God knows what for years. And then it sort of came out. And it was a very interesting thing, because people like Lord Acton and Cardinal Newman were highly suspicious of this guy Heisenberg, because he had, as far as they're concerned, he had betrayed them. I mean, he was one of them. He was releasing all the political prisoners in Europe and everything else. And then he issued this document called Syllabus of Errors. And Syllabus of Errors is very stern. It's like a series of anathemas. So he became like he went from being a libertarian to becoming a neoconservative. I don't know how you describe it, but I mean, he just completely switched his worldview. Well, and he was extremely authoritarian about the conduct of this council. Like he threatened with excommunication anybody who would leak any of the proceedings. And but meanwhile, the German theologians, Dollinger was like primary there, who ended up, by the way, getting excommunicated. But Acton was the cool guy in this whole process. So he rents an apartment in Rome, and he's got all these contacts, among some fat people that are hanging around the cat, who are coming to him at night, serving Negronis and cocktails and everything. And he's pumping them for information, like what went on in the council day. And then he would release it, very quickly in mimeograph machines and send it out to the press or the world. And nobody could find the leaker. It's Lord Acton this entire time, And barely escaped excommunication, mainly because he was a very wealthy aristocrat and was kind of dodgy, and would never admit, what he was up to. But anyway, what they did was, he was being used as an instrument of the Holy Spirit, because what they did is they exposed what the Pope was doing with the attempt to try to get his own political infallibility declared, and wrote a gigantic series of tracts, basically listing the crimes of the popes. Here's, this Pope, slaughtered this many number of people. This Pope, lied and killed this many number of people. Basically, I mean, what Dollinger and Acton and these guys were doing, read like a history of ghastly political crimes committed by the Catholic Church. And they said, you're going to call this stuff infallible? I mean, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about 6 to 80 people that he murdered, with his henchmen? This is a problem. You can't. The thing with infallibility too, it's not like, well, starting now the Pope will be infallible. If you're going to declare this as a doctrine, it's got to be retroactive to the very beginning. And that's a problem. So basically, Lord Acton and Cardinal Newman was actually very instrumental. He was much more diplomatic than Acton, but they were very instrumental in persuading the bishops to reject this whole thing and curb the imperial ambitions. And Acton's statement where he says power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. He meant that directly against the Pope in Rome, not against the government. I mean, it applies to the government too, but he meant it as an application against the idea of papal infallibility. Oh yeah, Acton was a great Catholic. Yeah. Great Catholic. He was a rebel. I mean, he was a pirate. He was an amazing guy. Yeah. Used by the Holy Spirit to stop the church from falling into error. That's my evaluation of it. So if you feel like, if you're a Catholic and you ever feel like you're a rebel, there's a lot of precedent for that in history. The rebels have done a lot of good for the church over the years. Yeah, how are you interrupt? Go ahead.
You mentioned the importance of well-defined property rights.
Yeah.
But you seem to be against the idea of well-defined intellectual property.
Yes, absolutely.
And it seemed to me that the reasoning for that was that there is no scarcity of ideas.
Yes.
It's infinitely replicable.
Yeah.
I wanted to go ahead and ask you this. Isn't there a scarcity of opportunity? For example, if I write a song, I put effort into it, no more or no less than somebody put effort in making that computer.
Yeah.
I only have the length of my life to profit from that song. So if you listen to that song without compensating me for it, if I ask you to give me $1 every time you listen to it, and you say, well, screw you, I'm going to listen to it anyway, doesn't that deprive me of the opportunity to profit from my labor?
No, it doesn't.
There's no accounting cost. There is an opportunity.
Yeah. It doesn't deprive you of your right to exclude me from using your song pending payment. And you're certainly welcome to do that. There's nothing immoral about that. In fact, the whole key, as anybody involved in digital commerce knows, to making money in the digital age is to somehow find a way to scarcify a superabundant good, right? You gotta figure it out, and if you don't figure it out, you're not gonna make a dime. My only point is simply that you've got to find other ways to do it besides using violence. Which is what IP really amounts to. I mean, IP is very important because it's not like a contract. IP, what it does is it binds third parties that are not party to your transaction. I mean, if you're claiming the exclusive protected right to a particular configuration of nodes, you're binding everybody else on the planet with the threat of violence that if they use that particular set of nodes, that they're not permitted to do that by a matter of law, and that's just stupid. I mean, it's not good business. It's not good business. And actually, I mean, we're coming into a world in which IP is increasingly irrelevant. The way companies are making money is by, well, guess what? By providing cool services. Not through copyright. And I would say that, I mean, Steve Jobs used to brag about how iTunes, uses copyright. It's not because of copyright iTunes is successful, it's because iTunes has a good delivery system of its service, So you've got to come up with cool ways to serve humanity if you want to make money. Copyright turns out really not to help you very much in that respect. Because piracy is absolutely everywhere, and will always be. You've got to find a way to create a scarce good out of a non-scarce good if you want to make money in the digital world. Photographers figured this out. I mean, 10 years ago, everybody was panicking, oh my God, no photography will ever again make any money because of piracy and the internet, right? And a little time goes by, people figure out how to use watermarks, how to deliver things very conveniently. In fact, the market for great pictures is just more elaborate and lucrative and fabulous than it's ever been because of the technological means has been discovered to exclude people pending payment. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
Can I follow that up?
Yeah.
You said that you can't use violence to enforce these property rights. Obviously, that applies to physical violence, but would you say it also applies to, let's say I download a certain TV show and a certain home box office sues me for a certain $10 million. Would you consider that in a way as a form of violence?
Yes. Yeah. No, if you've acquired something peacefully, you didn't hit anybody on the head.
Would you say then that they do have a right to sue me for the $10 that I would have had to pay them if I hadn't pirated it?
No, I wouldn't say so, no. It's up to the producer to figure out how to protect what he considers his property. And you've got to figure out the technological means, and people have figured out the technological means. I mean, Microsoft, you remember, the first iterations of Word, were so, you could just hand them out to all your friends. I think even Word 2003, it was like, you reproduce it, it's like, wow, this is great. But now they've figured out, how to make it. And even now, like, if you're a clever college kid, you can download a free copy of Office. You can get almost anything for free. But if you're a smart capitalist, you figure out how to provide a really cool good and restrict it and scarcify it, artificially, but not through violence. And one of the ways we do it now, of course, is through service contracts. I mean, I can download a copy of Windows 7 very quickly, but then the second that I have an update, they're going to say, this priority copy, buddy. It just turns out to be a lot easier to pay. So if you're a good business person, will figure out ways to make money in the digital world that don't involve using violence. I think it's a very bad sign for any business when they start relying on the state to protect their profitability. After Steve Jobs died, and because he was at the end of his life was catastrophic on the issue of patents. This always happens, right? Nobody likes patents when they're a small business, and then they become on top. It's like, well, I believe my intellectual property, and if you come after me, we're going to go nuclear and kill you. That's the way it always works. It's a typical business monopolist. It's always the same story. But when Apple went after Samsung, come on, it was insane. They were suing Samsung for the shape of its phone. And then, a couple of months later, after that idiotic trial, bamboozled jurors, slammed, Samsung. Sure enough, Apple comes out with this new iPad Mini. Well, it turns out Samsung had basically an iPad Mini, in production for the previous 18 months. I mean, who's pirating who? Look, capitalism is all about learning from everybody else. You have to be able to emulate what others do. You have to improve on it if you expect to make money. But you have to be able to emulate and copy others. That's an essential tool of commerce itself. Okay, I'm going on too long about this. You had something to say. I would never...
Well, I was going to ask briefly, is the text on a compact disc or in the liner notes that says, I will not distribute this, blah, 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 do you see that as a contract? That's why I don't pirate.
Well, I think everything would be a lot clearer if we didn't have intellectual property. Then these contracts would be a lot clearer. Everything's kind of mixed up today. I can imagine potentially those kinds of contracts that are. I'm a little suspicious of them just because, if I went to the store and they had a bunch of potatoes on sale, and they said, well, hello, sir, I'm very happy for you to buy these potatoes. The only thing is that these potatoes are kind of restricted. If you try to mash them, that's a problem. You've got to just slice them and serve them on blocks of cheese and cook them for 350 for 35 minutes. Then you can buy them. I'll be like, well, but if I get the potato, can I? No. I'm good. Then you smash those potatoes. So you see what I mean? It's a little funny. You buy a book and it says, you got to destroy this book, a year after you read it or whatever. And that's not a made-up case, the Catholic Church, I tell you, copyright is crazy for copyright accounting. The hymnals that my parish buys, they say, you must destroy this at the end of this liturgical season. It's a state, It's crazy. Make people, do crazy stuff. So what contracts would exist in the free market? Crazy state. Go ahead.
Sure. So one of the quotes from Rerum Novarum that I see all over the place, it seems to be that, probably the most important one, is the law, therefore, should favor ownership, and its policy should be to induce as many as possible people to become owners. And so I'm bringing this up because I want to know if there. So obviously, it has no sort of infallible authority to teach these things or to lobby for a certain particular law, but it does give that sort of general recommendation, right? What is your opinion of distributism? Given that it sort of, in a way, presupposes something of a free market, and yet does encourage sort of laws that would limit the size of certain businesses, et cetera. So I just want to take
so I'm glad you asked the question. It's for some background for those people who don't know. They're kind of like people who stretch Catholic social teaching to the left, to the point where it seems like they're pushing for some kind of goofy social, environmental socialism, or some kind of nonsense. On the other hand, on the right, there's a whole other group of people who want to render it in this package that they call distributivism. And your summary of it is really competent and very quick and very good. The idea is that we favor private property. We want as many people to be property owners as possible. I'm with it, as far as that goes, that's great. The big problem with the distributivists is that they end up hatching it the more they think about it, because typically these people aren't educated in any kind of economics, typically. So they have hatched complex schemes for limiting business size, and for wanting to use the power of the state, essentially, to redistribute property. The distributivists are really very tough nuts to crack. I've been asked to debate them, and I've variously attempted to do it, but there's so many different kinds of distributivists, and their central plans are so crazy. Mostly, I think the big problem with distributivism, not in that Leo the 13th sense, but in the way that exists now, like on the internet or whatever, is that they always think that they know better than what the market knows for how resources ought to be allocated. And there's a real pretense of knowledge there. They're not willing to let the system kind of run and be a process. They want to intervene and take a snapshot and go, that business is too big, that one, that guy's too poor. There's rearranging resources. And I'm just saying that this is actually very dangerous. The distributivists can be anarchist-oriented, or they can be like practically totalitarians and scary, depending on how arrogant, their central planning minded they are. So there's a huge literature on this distributivism topic. It's a large and complex and opaque body of work. I wouldn't mind calling myself a distributivist if it means only sticking to market means. But hey, I'm glad to call myself a socialist if it means sticking to market means. I don't care. Call me whatever you want to call me. I'll call myself anything. As long as it's voluntary and there's no violence and there's peace on earth, as the title of this lecture says, I'll call myself anything. Go ahead.
How would the free market Catholic capitalist approach the cure towards like a problem such as the 2008 housing bubble?
Okay, so that's an interesting case because that crazy housing bubble thing represented, the culmination of like 80 years of really, really bad policy, where the government decided, almost in a distributive sort of way, everybody should be an owner of a house. Why? Oh, because that's what the American dream is. Why? Well, because that's like a dream and a house that is good together, this is the whole idea. So like everybody kind of believed that somewhere between 1920 and 5 years ago. Well, it created a ridiculously gigantic bubble, and it was very much in the 10 years prior to that collapse, fed by the moral hazard created by these government lending institutions like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which offered implicit guarantees. Who knew just how guaranteed housing would be? I mean, they pretend to be these market institutions. Well, we're just holding mortgages, it's no big deal. We're good. No, the whole thing was, there was a presumption that everything was too big to fail. Well, that created moral hazard. People that take on more risk than they should. And then it was exacerbated by a Federal Reserve policy that was suppressing interest rates far below what the market would dictate, thereby inducing people to take on more risk than they should. And there is a widespread presumption. God, can you imagine people used to believe this? If you buy a house, it's going to go up in value, and it's guaranteed to go up in value faster than any other physical thing in this world. So if you're smart, buy a house. And that was the doctrine. That whole thing has been smashed completely. And I am thrilled about it because this is stupid. I mean, a house should depreciate in value, just like a car or a suit or a bow tie or a coffee maker or anything else. All physical things should just go the way of all flesh in the real world. If something is guaranteed to go up in value no matter what, there's a problem. Some things go up in value. It takes some clever people to figure out which ones those are. Those are called entrepreneurs and investors. And they're very smart people, Like if you were betting today, you might bet, for example, that Goldman Sachs is going up in value. Probably it is, because it's figured out. There, that's the essence. That's the essence of the housing situation. And it's weird to me. It's like, oh, okay, so we subsidized housing for 80 years and created these, crazy financial systems that back it and build, multi-billion-dollar, $100 billion, institutions that are too big to fail to back all the mortgages and then give anybody a mortgage no matter what the risk profile or anything else. And then when the whole system blows up, I go, there you go. The free market doesn't work. What? It wasn't a free market. Yeah. Oh, only one more. So it'd be fun to hang out more. We got scarcity of time, and we got a contest. This is a problem, which is like, okay. Go ahead.
Scarcity question.
Yeah.
You seem to find value because of scarcity in the real world, in the physical sense, but in the metaphysical sense, when you're saying, oh, we have these things like salvation and all that things, so for abundance, that seems to that'd be the antithesis to where value would come from. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
So like eternal life. We're supposed to.
Oh, why do we value eternal life even though it's a superabundant good?
Yeah.
Wow, I've never had a question like that. I bet Art can answer that.
Are you coming to the seminar tomorrow? Do, and I'll think about it over time.
Wait, but this goes way beyond the Dark Water paradox.
Oh yeah.
I think it really has something to do with subjective value, but I'm not gonna just jump into it too deeply because I think that's a really interesting question. Hey, thank you all so much for coming tonight. It was great to have you. I really enjoyed it.